On the crystalline planet of Lumina, far beyond Earth's solar system, two sisters lived in what they believed was absolute perfection. Hana and Eon spent their days in a society that had eliminated all chaos, disorder, and what they considered primitive emotions. Their world sparkled with buildings made of living crystal that changed colors with the twin sun's light, while perfectly organized transport pods moved silently through the air. The sisters shared a spacious home in the diplomatic district, where every morning they would connect to the planet-wide information network through their neural interfaces. Their favorite activity was watching broadcasts from Earth, a planet their people had secretly monitored for centuries. They would sit in their viewing chamber, their skins bioluminescent patterns glowing with what passed for amusement in their species, as they critiqued everything about human civilization. "Look at these humans," Hana would say, her tall, slender frame lounging on a conforming chair that adjusted to her every movement. Her silvery skin rippled with patterns of light that showed her disdain. "They're fighting over oil again. Can you believe they still burn fossil fuels?" Eon, the younger sister, would lean forward, her own markings pulsing with matching contempt. "And their entertainment. Did you see their latest movies? All emotion and chaos. No logic at all." She waved her long-fingered hand at the holographic display, dismissing scenes of human drama and comedy. Their morning ritual continued as usual, with both sisters adding their observations to the planet's social network. Their posts about Earth's primitive nature always gained significant attention, making them minor celebrities among their peers. They took pride in their witty observations about humanity's failings, from their inefficient political systems to their reliance on printed money. The sisters' father, Ambassador Lee, was one of Lumina's most respected diplomats. He had negotiated treaties with 12 different advanced civilizations, and was known for his perfectly logical approach to every situation. His tall frame and distinguished age markings commanded respect wherever he went, and his daughters had always basked in his success. One evening, as the family sat down to their precisely portioned nutrient meal, Ambassador Lee made an announcement that would shatter their perfectly ordered world. "I have accepted a new assignment," he said, his skin patterns showing official seriousness. "I will be Lumina's first official ambassador to Earth." Hannah's fork clattered onto her plate, a shocking breach of etiquette. "Earth? But father, they don't even know about alien life yet." "That is about to change," Ambassador Lee replied calmly. "The Council has decided Earth has progressed enough to make first contact, and you two will be coming with me." Yun's skin turned almost completely white, a sign of extreme distress. "But they're barbarians. They still have wars. They can't even agree on basic social structures. We'll have to live among them." Hannah asked, her voice rising to an unseemly pitch. "Actually interact with humans." Their father's skin showed patterns of gentle authority. "You will both be given biomodification treatments to appear human. You will attend their educational institutions to learn about their culture firsthand. This is not a request. The Council believes having younger representatives will help humans accept our presence." The sisters looked at each other in horror. Their perfect life of observing and mocking Earth from a safe distance was about to become uncomfortably real. All their years of posting critical comments about humans would now come back to haunt them. "But what about our friends? Our social status?" Yun protested. "We'll be living like savages." Ambassador Lee's skin patterns showed what humans might call amusement. "Perhaps this experience will teach you both that observation from a distance does not equal understanding. You've made quite a name for yourselves criticizing Earth. Now you'll have the chance to see if your assumptions are correct." The sisters spent the rest of the evening in their private chambers, their skin patterns showing a riot of distressed colors as they combed through their years of Earth posts. Everything they'd mocked, human emotions, human customs, human relationships, they would now have to experience firsthand. "This can't be happening," Hannah moaned, watching the human news broadcast with new eyes. "Look at their clothes. We'll have to wear actual fabric instead of adaptive skin coverings." "Their food," Yun added in horror. They put dead plants and animals in their mouths and chew them. We'll have to eat like that. As the reality of their situation sank in, both sisters realized their perfectly ordered world was about to become as chaotic as the planet they had spent so long criticizing. Their father had given them 1 month to prepare for departure, 1 month to learn basic human behaviors and mannerisms. They had no idea that their upcoming adventure would change not just their views on humanity, but their entire understanding of what made a civilization truly advanced. As they lay in their conforming beds that night, watching Earth's single moon through their crystal window, neither sister could have predicted that the planet they so despised would soon become the place where they would find something their perfect society had never offered them: true happiness. The biomodification treatments would begin tomorrow, and with them, the first step toward a future that terrified and repulsed them. If only they knew that their horror would soon turn to fascination, and eventually to love. The biotechnology lab on Lumina had done its work well. When Hannah looked in the mirror, a human face stared back at her. No more silvery skin, no more bioluminescent patterns, just ordinary human features. Her once fluid movements had become more rigid, limited by human joints and muscles. Next to her, Yun kept touching her new face, trying to adjust to the sensation of having such fixed features. Remember, their father said as their ship approached Earth's atmosphere, humans cannot know what we really are. Your covers are complete. You're international students from a remote part of South Korea, raised abroad. Your human language skills have been programmed perfectly. The sisters sat silently as their ship, disguised as a private jet, landed at Incheon International Airport. The spaceport on Lumina had been clean, quiet, and orderly. This human airport assaulted their senses. The smell of food cooking, hundreds of voices talking at once, children crying, luggage wheels rolling across floors. Un grabbed her sister's arm. "How do they live like this?" she whispered. "There's so much chaos." Their father led them through customs with their perfectly crafted human documents. He would be staying in the diplomatic quarter, preparing for humanity's first official contact with alien life. The sisters, however, would be living in a student apartment near Seoul National University. Their first night in the apartment was a lesson in human discomfort. The beds didn't conform to their bodies. The air temperature couldn't be mentally adjusted. They had to physically walk to the food preparation area, which humans called a kitchen, to get sustenance. "I hate these clothes," Hannah complained, pulling at her university uniform. "They don't adjust to temperature or movement, and they're made from dead plants." The next morning brought their first day at university. They had been engineered to look like perfectly ordinary Korean students, but everything about human interaction baffled them. A girl in Hannah's first class grabbed her arm and said, "Hey, want to get coffee after class?" Hannah froze, horrified by the casual physical contact. On Lumina, touching another person without formal permission was considered extremely rude. "No, thank you," she managed to say, perhaps too stiffly. Yun's experience wasn't any better. During lunch, she sat alone, watching in disgust as students around her put food in their mouths and physically chewed it. On Lumina, nutrition was absorbed through special chambers. This primitive act of eating was almost too much to bear. The streets of Seoul proved even more challenging. The sisters had never experienced anything like it. The press of bodies on the subway, the constant noise of traffic, the overwhelming smell of street food, and the way humans seemed to have no sense of personal space. "Did you see how they bump into each other and just say sorry like it's nothing?" Yun asked that evening. No formal apology, no recording of the offense. They just move on. Hannah was struggling with her own observations. Today in class, everyone laughed when the professor made a mistake. Actually laughed. On Lumina, a teacher's error would be noted and corrected with proper procedure, not met with this strange vocal expression. Their father called every evening on what humans called a smartphone, another primitive device they had to learn to use. "How are you adapting?" he asked. "Terribly," Yun replied. "Humans have no order, no proper procedures. Today someone tried to share their food with me. Share it. Do they not understand basic hygiene? And they keep trying to include us in their social groups, Hana added. They ask personal questions without filing the proper relationship-building forms first. Their father's voice carried a note of amusement. Perhaps these humans have their own ways of building relationships. Keep observing. Remember, this is temporary. That became their daily mantra. This is temporary. They whispered it when the subway got too crowded, when classmates tried to include them in study groups, when the noise and smell of the city became overwhelming. But despite their best efforts to remain aloof, human life began to seep into their daily routine. Eun found herself humming along to the music that played everywhere. Hana caught herself smiling, actually smiling, when a student made a clever comment in class. "We're being contaminated," Eun worried one evening. "Today I actually wanted to try something called bubble tea because it looked interesting." Interesting. Since when do we find primitive human beverages interesting? Hana had her own confession. I caught myself wondering what it would be like to go to something called a noraebang with my classmates. They sing there, Eun. They make voluntary noise for entertainment. Both sisters stared at each other in horror. They were changing, and they knew it. Their perfect luminen reserve was slipping. Worse yet, part of them was starting to wonder if that was entirely bad. As they prepared for sleep that night, they repeated their mantra again. This is temporary. But for the first time, there was a hint of uncertainty in their voices. Neither sister wanted to admit it, but Earth was beginning to fascinate them, even as it horrified them. They were starting to understand why their father had chosen them for this mission. Sometimes the best way to overcome prejudice was to experience what you feared firsthand. Hana sat in her environmental science class, perfectly positioned exactly 2 meters from any other student, just as she had calculated for optimal non-interaction. Then Jin walked in late, looked around the crowded classroom, and sat right next to her. Her carefully maintained space was invaded by his presence, his backpack, and most alarmingly, his smile. "Sorry, is this seat taken?" he asked, even though he had already settled in. On Lumina, such a breach of protocol would have required 3 different forms and a formal apology ceremony. Before she could formulate a proper response, the professor began discussing Earth's rapidly changing climate. Jin leaned forward, his entire body showing what humans called enthusiasm. Hana found herself distracted by his reactions, the way his eyes lit up when discussing solutions, how his hands moved when he explained concepts to their group. During their first group project, Jin surprised her. While other students talked about theoretical solutions, he pulled out his tablet and showed her real gardens he had helped create on Seoul's rooftops. "See these?" he said, scrolling through pictures of green spaces hidden above the concrete jungle. "We're bringing nature back to the city, one garden at a time." Hana stared at the images, confused by the emotion in his voice. "But why?" she asked. "Surely artificial environments would be more efficient." Jin's smile changed to something softer. "It's not just about efficiency. These gardens help clean the air, provide food, and give people places to connect with nature. Want to see them?" Before her Luminen training could stop her, Hana heard herself say yes. Meanwhile, Eun's own carefully constructed world was about to shift. She had been walking home from the university, taking her usual route calculated to avoid maximum human contact, when rain forced her to duck into the nearest building. It turned out to be a small jazz club. She meant to leave as soon as the rain slowed, but then one took the stage with his saxophone. Eun had studied Earth's music as part of their preparation, categorizing it as primitive and chaotic. But one's music was different. It spoke of things her people had long ago decided were unnecessary: longing, joy, sadness, hope. One played with his eyes closed, swaying slightly, his fingers dancing over the saxophone's keys. Eun found herself rooted to her spot, her heart doing strange things in her chest. When he opened his eyes and smiled at the audience, she felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her manufactured human body. After the show, One approached her table. "First time here?" he asked, sitting down without asking permission. On Lumina, such an action would have been unthinkable. "Yes," Ian replied stiffly. "I was avoiding the rain." "And did you like what you heard?" Ian struggled to find the proper response. Her people had protocols for expressing appreciation of technical skill, but nothing to describe how one's music had made her feel. "It was interesting," she managed. One laughed, a sound that should have offended her but somehow didn't. "Interesting. That's a new one. Usually people either love jazz or hate it." "How do you know what to play?" she asked, genuinely curious. "There appears to be no set structure. That's the beauty of jazz," one explained, his eyes lighting up. "It's about feeling the music, connecting with it, and with the audience. Sometimes the best moments happen when we break away from the structure." Break away from structure. On Lumina, such a concept would be considered dangerous. Yet Un found herself wanting to understand more. As the weeks passed, both sisters found their carefully maintained distance from humans becoming harder to sustain. Hannah spent afternoons with Jin in his rooftop gardens, learning about Earth's complex ecosystems. She watched him gently tend to plants, explaining how each species played a vital role in the garden's health. "You see," he said one day, showing her a tiny bee visiting a flower, "everything is connected. When we harm one part of the system, we harm ourselves." Hannah thought about her own world, where everything was controlled and separate. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps her people had lost something important in their pursuit of perfect order. Ian started visiting the jazz club regularly, telling herself she was merely studying human culture. But the truth was, one's music moved something in her that she hadn't known existed. After his performances, they would talk for hours about music theory, which somehow always led to discussions about life, emotions, and the beautiful unpredictability of human existence. One evening, one asked her to dinner. "Nothing fancy," he said quickly, seeing her hesitation. "Just food and conversation." Un knew she should refuse. Their mission required maintaining emotional distance from humans, but one smile made her usual logical arguments seem less important. Both sisters found themselves keeping secrets, not just from the humans around them, but from each other. Hannah didn't mention how her heart raced when Jin's hand accidentally brushed hers while planting seedlings. Un kept quiet about the way one's music made her want to move in ways that would have scandalized their people. Their perfect Luminan reserve was cracking, replaced by something messier, but somehow more real. They were beginning to understand that perhaps Earth's chaos wasn't a weakness after all. Perhaps there was strength in the very connections they had been taught to avoid. Hannah sat in her environmental science class, perfectly positioned exactly 2 meters from any other student, just as she had calculated for optimal non-interaction. Then Jin walked in late, looked around the crowded classroom, and sat right next to her. Her carefully maintained space was invaded by his presence, his backpack, and most alarmingly, his smile. "Sorry, is this seat taken?" he asked, even though he had already settled in. On Lumina, such a breach of protocol would have required 3 different forms and a formal apology ceremony. Before she could formulate a proper response, the professor began discussing Earth's rapidly changing climate. Jin leaned forward, his entire body showing what humans called enthusiasm. Hannah found herself distracted by his reactions, the way his eyes lit up when discussing solutions, how his hands moved when he explained concepts to their group. During their first group project, Jin surprised her. While other students talked about theoretical solutions, he pulled out his tablet and showed her real gardens he had helped create on Seoul's rooftops. "See these," he said, scrolling through pictures of green spaces hidden above the concrete jungle. "We're bringing nature back to the city, one garden at a time." Hannah stared at the images, confused by the emotion in his voice. "But why?" she asked. "Surely artificial environments would be more efficient." Jin's smile changed to something softer. "It's not just about efficiency. These gardens help clean the air, provide food, and give people places to connect with nature. Want to see them?" Before her Luminan training could stop her, Hana heard herself say yes. Meanwhile, Un's own carefully constructed world was about to shift. She had been walking home from the university, taking her usual route calculated to avoid maximum human contact, when rain forced her to duck into the nearest building. It turned out to be a small jazz club. She meant to leave as soon as the rain slowed, but then one took the stage with his saxophone. Un had studied Earth's music as part of their preparation, categorizing it as primitive and chaotic. But one's music was different. It spoke of things her people had long ago decided were unnecessary: longing, joy, sadness, hope. One played with his eyes closed, swaying slightly, his fingers dancing over the saxophone's keys. Un found herself rooted to her spot, her heart doing strange things in her chest. When he opened his eyes and smiled at the audience, she felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her manufactured human body. After the show, one approached her table. "First time here?" he asked, sitting down without asking permission. On Lumina, such an action would have been unthinkable. "Yes," Yun replied stiffly. "I was avoiding the rain." "And did you like what you heard?" Yun struggled to find the proper response. Her people had protocols for expressing appreciation of technical skill, but nothing to describe how one's music had made her feel. "It was interesting," she managed. One laughed, a sound that should have offended her but somehow didn't. "Interesting. That's a new one. Usually people either love jazz or hate it." "How do you know what to play?" she asked, genuinely curious. "There appears to be no set structure." "That's the beauty of jazz," one explained, his eyes lighting up. "It's about feeling the music, connecting with it, and with the audience. Sometimes the best moments happen when we break away from the structure." Break away from structure. On Lumina, such a concept would be considered dangerous. Yet Un found herself wanting to understand more. As the weeks passed, both sisters found their carefully maintained distance from humans becoming harder to sustain. Hana spent afternoons with Jin in his rooftop gardens, learning about Earth's complex ecosystems. She watched him gently tend to plants, explaining how each species played a vital role in the garden's health. "You see," he said one day, showing her a tiny bee visiting a flower, "everything is connected. When we harm one part of the system, we harm ourselves." Hana thought about her own world, where everything was controlled and separate. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps her people had lost something important in their pursuit of perfect order. Started visiting the jazz club regularly, telling herself she was merely studying human culture. But the truth was, one's music moved something in her that she hadn't known existed. After his performances, they would talk for hours about music theory, which somehow always led to discussions about life, emotions, and the beautiful unpredictability of human existence. One evening, one asked her to dinner. "Nothing fancy," he said quickly, seeing her hesitation. "Just food and conversation." Un knew she should refuse. Their mission required maintaining emotional distance from humans, but one smile made her usual logical arguments seem less important. Both sisters found themselves keeping secrets, not just from the humans around them, but from each other. Hana didn't mention how her heart raced when Jin's hand accidentally brushed hers while planting seedlings. Un kept quiet about the way one's music made her want to move in ways that would have scandalized their people. Their perfect Luminan reserve was cracking, replaced by something messier, but somehow more real. They were beginning to understand that perhaps Earth's chaos wasn't a weakness after all. Perhaps there was strength in the very connections they had been taught to avoid. Spring arrived in Seoul, bringing with it a transformation that left both sisters speechless. Cherry blossoms covered the streets in pink snow, and humans stopped their busy lives just to admire the flowers. Hana watched as Jin lay on a blanket under the trees, his eyes closed and a peaceful smile on his face. "Isn't it amazing?" he asked, patting the space beside him. "Once a year, the whole city stops to watch these blooms." Hana hesitated, then lay down beside him. On Lumina, lying on the ground would have been unthinkable. But here, watching pink petals dance against the blue sky, she understood why humans did it. Jin's urban gardening project had grown. Hannah found herself spending weekends helping transform empty rooftops into green havens. Her hands, once used only for operating advanced technology, now knew the feel of soil and the delicate strength of growing things. She discovered that plants responded to gentle care, something her logical upbringing had never taught her. "Look," Jin said one day, showing her a butterfly landing on a flower they had planted together. A few months ago, this was just concrete. Now it's full of life. Meanwhile, Un's world had become filled with music. One's jazz club became her second home. She learned to recognize different instruments, to feel the way rhythm could make her body want to move. One taught her about improvisation, a concept that would have horrified her just months ago. "Jazz is like life," one explained, cleaning his saxophone after a performance. "You have a basic structure, but the magic happens when you let yourself be free within it." One evening, one convinced Un to try street food. She stood nervously at a pojangmacha, watching the vendor prepare tteokbokki. The smell made her engineered taste buds tingle. Her first bite of the spicy rice cake brought tears to her eyes, both from the heat and from the realization that she had been missing out on so much. "Good, right?" one asked, laughing at her expression. He wiped a tear from her cheek, and Un felt her heart skip in a very unluminant way. The sisters found themselves drawn into the rhythm of human life. They attended a lantern festival, where thousands of lights transformed the night into magic. They learned to enjoy the chaos of markets, the way humans bargained and laughed and shared food with strangers. One weekend, Jin took Hannah to a traditional tea ceremony. She watched the careful movements, the respect shown to each step of the process, and realized that humans did have order. It was just different from what she knew. Their order celebrated connection rather than separation. "Tea ceremonies teach us mindfulness," Jin explained, showing her how to hold the cup properly. "Sometimes slowing down helps us appreciate the moment more." Un discovered Norabang with one and his musician friends. At first, she just watched as others sang, but one night, encouraged by one's smile, she tried it herself. Her voice shook as she sang a simple Korean pop song, but the joy on one's face made her feel like she had performed a masterpiece. Their father noticed the changes in his daughters during their weekly calls. Hannah talked excitedly about plant growth cycles and ecosystem balance. Eun hummed melody lines and used words like feeling and expression without flinching. "You seem different," he observed during one call. "More alive." The sisters shared a look. They were different. They had learned that human emotions weren't primitive. They were complex, beautiful things that added depth to existence. They had discovered that chaos could create opportunities for joy that perfect order never allowed. Hannah found herself looking forward to the unpredictability of each day. Sometimes a plant would grow in an unexpected direction, or Jin would suggest a spontaneous trip to a new garden site. These surprises, which would once have disturbed her, now felt like gifts. Un started collecting music, not just jazz but all kinds. She learned that different styles could match different moods, something her people had never acknowledged even existed. One introduced her to traditional Korean music, and she found beauty in the way it told stories without words. One evening, as they sat in their apartment, Yum confessed to her sister, "I don't think I can go back to how we were before." Hannah nodded, understanding completely. "Yesterday I laughed. Really laughed. Not just because it was socially expected." Jin said something funny, and the sound just came out naturally. They looked at each other, realizing how far they had come from their first horrified days on Earth. Their perfect, logical world seemed less perfect now. They had learned that there was strength in vulnerability, beauty in imperfection, and joy in the unexpected. The sisters who had once mocked Earth's chaos now found themselves embracing it. They had discovered that life wasn't meant to be controlled. It was meant to be lived, with all its messy, beautiful, unpredictable moments. And somewhere in their changing hearts, Both sisters knew that their temporary stay on Earth had become something much more permanent than they had ever expected. The rain had been falling for days across Seoul, heavier than anyone could remember. Hannah watched from her window as the Han River swelled dangerously, its waters rising hour by hour. The city's flood warning systems blared constantly, their sound mixing with the endless drumming of rain. Jin called early one morning, his voice tight with worry. "The community gardens are flooding," he said. "We need to save what we can." Without hesitation, Hannah joined him on the rooftops, helping to move plants to higher ground. As they worked, she noticed how other gardeners came to help, strangers united by a common cause. This kind of spontaneous cooperation would never have happened on Lumina. Across the city, Yeon and Won were helping move instruments from the jazz club's basement. The water was already ankle-deep, and more was seeping in every minute. Won's precious saxophone was safely strapped to his back as they passed instruments hand to hand up the stairs, forming a human chain with other musicians and club regulars. The sisters kept in constant contact through their hidden neural links, sharing updates about the rising waters. Their father was away at a diplomatic conference, leaving them to make their own decisions about how to help without revealing their true nature. Then the emergency broadcasts announced that the flood barriers near Gangnam were starting to fail. If they broke, thousands of homes would be destroyed. Without discussing it, both sisters headed toward the danger. They found chaos at the barriers. Emergency workers struggled to reinforce the walls as water pushed against them with frightening force. Hannah noticed hairline cracks forming in the concrete, cracks that human eyes couldn't yet see, but that her enhanced vision detected easily. "We have to do something," Yeon whispered to her sister. "We can't let all these people lose their homes." Before Hannah could respond, she heard familiar voices. Jin and Won had followed them, concerned for their safety. The sisters shared a panicked look. They couldn't reveal their abilities with the men watching, but they couldn't stand by and do nothing. The decision was made for them when a section of the barrier began to give way. Without thinking about consequences, Hannah and Yeon pressed their hands against the concrete. Using their species' natural ability to manipulate molecular structures, they began strengthening the barrier from within, their fingers glowing faintly as they worked. What are you doing?" Jin's voice came from behind them, filled with wonder rather than fear. The sisters froze, their hands still on the barrier. They turned to see Jin and Won staring at them, their eyes wide with amazement. The secret they had guarded so carefully was now exposed. But instead of running away or calling for help, Won stepped forward. "Whatever you're doing, don't stop," he said quietly. "We'll make sure no one else sees." The men positioned themselves to block the view from other workers, allowing the sisters to continue their work. The barrier grew stronger under their touch, the concrete restructuring itself at a molecular level. Hours passed as they worked their way along the wall, strengthening weak points that human engineers hadn't even discovered yet. Jin and Won stayed with them, bringing water when they tired and warning them when others approached. Finally, the rain began to ease. The flood waters stabilized, and the barrier held firm. The sisters stepped back, exhausted from using abilities they had been taught to keep hidden. "So," Jin said as they walked away from the scene, "I guess we have some things to talk about." They found a quiet coffee shop, nearly empty due to the floods. Over steaming cups, the sisters told their story, about Lumina, about their mission, about their growing love for Earth despite their initial prejudice. "That explains so much," one said, smiling. "Like why you were so confused by jazz at first, Yeon. You'd never experienced anything that wasn't perfectly structured. And why you asked such specific questions about how plants grew," Jin added, looking at Hannah with new understanding. "You were trying to understand Earth's natural systems." The men's acceptance amazed the sisters. On Lumina, any deviation from normal behavior would have been met with formal investigations and possible social isolation. But Jin and Won simply absorbed the information, asking curious questions about life on another planet. "Are you going to report us?" Hannah asked finally, voicing their biggest fear. Jin reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that no longer felt alien to her. Of course not. You'd just save thousands of homes. Besides, he smiled, I think I was already falling in love with an alien. Finding out it's literally true doesn't change anything. One nodded in agreement, his eyes fixed on Ian. Your music makes more sense now too. You play like someone discovering emotions for the first time. Because you are. The sisters felt relief wash over them, stronger than even the flood waters had been. Their secret was out, but instead of disaster, they had found even deeper connections with the humans they had come to care for. As they left the coffee shop, stepping carefully around puddles, Ian realized something. We broke about 50 different Luminant protocols today, she said to her sister. Hannah smiled. Yes, and we'd do it again. Maybe that's what Father meant about Earth teaching us something important. The flood had changed more than the city's landscape. It had washed away the last of the sisters' pretense, leaving them free to be their true selves with at least 2 humans who had proved that Earth's emotional nature wasn't a weakness, it was its greatest strength. Ambassador Lee's office in the diplomatic quarter looked over the city of Seoul. The evening lights twinkled below like stars, and the Han River wound through the city like a silver ribbon. Hannah and Ian sat across from their father, their hearts beating rapidly in their human forms as they prepared to confess everything. Father, Hannah began, during the floods, we used our abilities to save the barrier. 2 humans saw us. They expected shock, disappointment, or anger. Instead, their father smiled. I know, he said quietly. The security cameras caught it. I had them erased. The sisters stared at him in surprise. Lun leaned forward. You're not angry. How could I be? Ambassador Lee looked out at the city. You did exactly what these humans would have done. You helped others without thinking of protocols or consequences. That's what makes Earth special. He turned back to his daughters. But now we have a decision to make. The council has heard about the incident. They're demanding your immediate return to Lumina. The sisters felt their worlds crumbling. Return to Lumina. Leave behind the gardens, the music, Jin, and One. The thought made their human hearts ache in a way their luminant forms never could. There's more, their father continued. Jin and One have been investigated. The council knows they're aware of our true nature. They want them processed. Their memories of us would be erased. No, both sisters cried out simultaneously. The thought of Jin and One forgetting everything, their shared experiences, their growing love, the trust they'd built, was unbearable. I thought you might feel that way, Ambassador Lee said. He pressed a button on his desk, and to their shock, Jin and One entered the office. We've been talking, Jin said, moving to stand beside Hannah. Your father has been explaining everything about Lumina, about your mission here. One took Yun's hand. He's also told us about the council's demands. Ambassador Lee watched his daughters with their human partners. I've seen how Earth has changed you both, how it's changed me too. Here, people help strangers during floods. They make music that serves no logical purpose except to move the soul. They plant gardens on concrete just to add beauty to their world. He stood and walked to the window. When I first came here, I thought like the council, that Earth was primitive, that humans were inferior because they let emotions guide them. But I've learned that their emotions give them strength we never knew existed. But the council, Hannah started. The council sees only what they want to see, her father interrupted. They don't understand that Earth's chaos creates resilience, that human emotions create connections stronger than any logical bond. He turned to face them all. I've made my decision as ambassador. I'm recommending that Earth be classified as an advanced civilization, one that could teach us as much as we could teach them. The sisters couldn't believe what they were hearing. Such a recommendation went against centuries of Luminan policy. But what about us? Yun asked softly. What about Jin and One? Their father's face softened. That's your decision to make. You can return to Lumina, resume your old lives, or you can stay here, help build a bridge between our worlds. It would mean giving up your positions in Luminan society. But we'll stay, Hannah said without hesitation. Jin squeezed her hand. Both of us, Eon added, looking at one with tear-filled eyes. Tears she no longer tried to hide. Ambassador Lee nodded, as if he'd expected this answer. Then we have work to do. Earth is about to learn they're not alone in the universe. They'll need guides who understand both worlds. The sisters looked at each other, then at the humans they had come to love. The choice that should have been difficult wasn't difficult at all. They had found something on Earth that Lumina, for all its perfection, had never offered them: the freedom to feel, to grow, to love. The Council won't be happy, Hannah said. Their father smiled. The Council needs to learn what you two already have, that sometimes the best discoveries come from embracing what we don't understand. As they left the office that night, walking out into Seoul's busy streets, the sisters felt lighter than they had since arriving on Earth. They were choosing a harder path, full of challenges and uncertainties, but they were choosing it together. Jin and Won took them to celebrate at a small restaurant where they shared food and laughter and plans for the future. The sisters no longer saw the chaos around them as primitive. Instead, they saw it as beautiful, a dance of life and emotion that their logical world had forgotten how to perform. Their father's words echoed in their minds. Different doesn't mean inferior. They had come to Earth thinking they would endure it, survive it, judge it. Instead, Earth had changed them, taught them, saved them from a life half-lived. And as they walked home under the stars that night, holding hands with the humans who had helped them discover their hearts, they knew they had made the right choice. 5 years after their decision to stay on Earth, the sisters' lives had transformed in ways they never imagined possible. Hannah and Jin's wedding combined Earth and Luminan traditions, creating something entirely new. They held it in one of their rooftop gardens, where advanced Luminan growing techniques had helped Earth plants thrive in impossible conditions. Hannah wore a traditional Korean hanbok, but underneath, her skin occasionally flickered with happiness in its natural Luminan way, a secret display only her sister and father could see. Jin's vows made everyone cry, especially when he promised to love her in any form she chose to take. Together, they established the Earth Lumina Sustainable Technology Institute. Their work combined Jin's understanding of Earth's ecosystems with Hannah's knowledge of advanced alien technology. Their first major success came when they developed self-maintaining vertical farms that could feed thousands in urban areas with minimal resources. Eon and Won's path took them around the world. Won's jazz had evolved into something entirely new: Earth instruments playing Luminan harmonies, creating music that spoke to both worlds. Eon learned to let her natural Luminan ability to manipulate energy flow through their performances, creating light shows that danced with the music. Their concerts became famous for their beauty and mystery. Audiences didn't know that the spectacular light effects came from alien technology. They just knew they had never experienced anything like it before. Each performance told the story of two worlds meeting, though only a few knew the true meaning behind the music. The sisters' father continued his work as ambassador, but with a new approach. Instead of hiding their presence, the Luminans began a careful program of cultural exchange. Hannah and Eon became the faces of this program, sharing their experiences through carefully crafted stories and demonstrations. They started a series of educational programs called Beyond Earth, where they taught humans about sustainable technology and artistic expression. Their students never knew their teachers were aliens, but they learned to see their own world through new eyes. One day, a young student asked Hannah why she seemed so amazed by simple things like rainfall or butterflies. She smiled and replied, "Sometimes it takes an outsider to remind you of the magic in everyday life." Yun found herself teaching music in ways that would have shocked her former self. "Don't think about the notes," she would tell her students. "Feel them in your heart." The phrase would have been meaningless to her just a few years ago. Their influence reached back to Lumina as well. Through their father's diplomatic channels, they sent regular reports about Earth's achievements. They showed how human emotions led to scientific breakthroughs, how Earth's artists pushed boundaries that logical minds would never have approached. Slowly, attitudes on Lumina began to change. Young Luminans started requesting assignments on Earth. Some even began displaying emotions more openly, inspired by the sisters' stories. During a rare quiet evening, the sisters sat with their husbands in Hannah's garden, watching the sunset paint Seoul's skylines in colors that still took their breath away. One played his saxophone softly while Jin tended to some experimental plants. "Do you ever regret it?" Un asked her sister in their native tongue. "Giving up our perfect world." Hannah watched Jin as he gently supported a growing vine. "Perfect isn't the same as complete," she replied. "We had order, but we never had this." Their father joined them sometimes for these evening gatherings, watching with pride as his daughters moved effortlessly between their two worlds. He had been right. Earth had taught them, and through them, was teaching Lumina, that true advancement came from embracing differences rather than fearing them. The sisters kept small reminders of their homeworld, crystalline sculptures that glowed softly at night, pieces of technology disguised as ordinary objects. But they no longer felt like exiles or observers. Earth had become their home. Its chaos had become their comfort, its emotions their strength. Years later, when the first official cultural exchange program brought young Luminans to Earth, Hana and Eun were chosen as mentors. Looking at these newcomers' shocked faces, they remembered their own first days of horror and disdain. "You'll understand soon," they told the new arrivals. "Earth has a way of teaching you what you never knew you needed to learn." And when these young Luminans asked about their choice to stay, about giving up their positions in a perfect society for this chaotic world, both sisters would share a knowing look and smile. "We found our true home where we least expected it," they would say. And in their words, their new siblings from the stars could hear the truth, that sometimes the greatest discoveries come from embracing what we once feared, and the greatest love comes from opening our hearts to possibilities we never imagined.